Rich mountain man bought her at auction, handed her the money. Buy your freedom or stay free here. The town of Silver Ridge rested quietly between tall mountains covered with thick pine trees. In the early mornings, soft fog rolled down the slopes like a white blanket, and by afternoon the sun shone brightly on the wooden rooftops. It was a small place where everyone knew each other's names, stories, and even secrets. People worked hard, spoke simply, and valued reputation more than gold. Every autumn, when the air turned crisp and leaves changed to shades of orange and red, the town held a large charity auction. It was not just an event, it was a tradition. Lanterns were hung across the town square. Long wooden tables were placed inside the old town hall. Farmers brought their best produce, artists brought paintings, craftsmen offered handmade furniture, and some people even offered their time and labor for a price. The money collected was meant to support struggling families before winter arrived. That year, however, the mood felt different. Whispers had been traveling through Silver Ridge for weeks about a young woman named Mara Ellison. She had once lived happily in a small cottage at the edge of town with her father. He had been a kind but unlucky man. After a failed business investment and a long illness, he passed away, leaving behind heavy debts. The lenders were not cruel men, but they were strict. Payments were overdue, warnings had been given. Mara had tried everything. She sold furniture, jewelry, even her father's watch. She worked long hours sewing clothes for families in town. She offered tutoring to children. Still, it was not enough. The debt was too large. With winter coming, the lenders demanded a final arrangement. And so, after sleepless nights and quiet tears no one saw, Mara made a decision that shocked the town. She signed a legal work contract that would place her labor up for auction for 1 full year. The highest bidder would pay her father's debt in exchange for her work. It was not a common practice, but it was not illegal either. Some saw it as a way to settle accounts honorably. Others felt uneasy about it. On the evening of the auction, the town hall glowed warmly under lantern light. People filled the wooden benches, their voices mixing into a steady hum. Wealthy visitors from nearby cities had also arrived, curious about the famous Silver Ridge auction. The smell of fresh bread and pine wood filled the air. At the back of the hall, Mara stood alone. She wore a simple blue dress, clean but old. Her dark hair was neatly tied back. She stood straight, her shoulders firm, her chin lifted slightly. Inside, her heart beat fast, but her face showed calm strength. She refused to let anyone see fear. Across the room, Elias Rowan entered quietly. The moment he stepped inside, the air seemed to shift. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a dark coat made of fine wool. His presence was strong but silent. Elias was the wealthiest landowner in the region. He owned large sections of forest, farmland, and the grand timber house built high on the mountain ridge. Few people visited him there. Fewer still understood him. Some called him proud. Others called him cold. He rarely attended town gatherings unless necessary. When he did, he spoke little and left early. Tonight, however, he took a seat near the front. The auction began with familiar items: a farmer's prized dairy cow, a beautiful hand-carved dining table, several jars of rare mountain honey. Bidding moved quickly, laughter rose and fell, and coins exchanged hands. Then the auctioneer cleared his throat. "There is one final contract tonight," he announced carefully. The hall quieted. "Mara Ellison has agreed to offer 1 year of her labor in exchange for settlement of her family's debt. The contract is legal and signed. The winning bid will cover the full amount owed." A wave of murmurs spread across the room. Mara stepped forward onto the small wooden stage. For a moment, the lantern light touched her face. She looked neither ashamed nor broken. She looked determined. The auctioneer began with a modest starting bid. Silence. Then someone from the back called out a number. Another voice raised it slightly higher. The bids moved slowly at first. Some people avoided eye contact. Others studied her as if measuring value, which made several townsfolk uncomfortable. A few women in the crowd looked away entirely. Elias Rowan remained still, his hands resting calmly on his cane. The bidding increased. One wealthy visitor laughed lightly and raised the amount again. It felt less like charity now and more like competition. The tension in the room thickened. Mara kept her eyes forward. When the amount reached close to the debt total, the bidding slowed. It seemed the contract would close just enough to settle accounts. Then Elias Rowan finally spoke. His voice was deep and steady. He called out a number far above the current bid. Gasps filled the hall. The amount he offered was not just enough to settle the debt. It was more than double. The other bidders fell silent immediately. No one dared challenge him. Competing with Elias Rowan was like trying to outbid the mountain itself. The auctioneer hesitated, then repeated the amount loudly. Going once. Silence. Going twice. No voice answered. The gavel struck the wooden block. Sold. A strange quiet followed. People glanced at each other. Questions formed but remained unspoken. Why would the richest man in Silver Ridge need a bonded worker? Elias stood slowly and walked toward the stage. His steps were firm but not rushed. When he reached Mara, he did not grab her arm or inspect her like property. He simply met her eyes. For the first time that evening, she felt uncertainty flicker inside her. He studied her face for a brief second, as if confirming something only he understood. "You'll come with me," he said calmly. There was no harshness in his tone, no excitement either, only quiet certainty. Mara nodded once. The debt collectors stepped forward to receive confirmation of payment. Papers were signed. The contract was transferred officially. It was done. Just like that, her father's debt no longer hung over her life. As Elias turned to leave, the crowd parted automatically. Some whispered behind hands, others watched with open curiosity. Outside, the night air was cool and sharp. A black carriage waited near the road that led up the mountain. The horses snorted softly in the cold. Myra paused for a second and looked back at the glowing town hall. It felt like she was leaving behind not just a building, but her old life. Elias opened the carriage door without speaking. She stepped inside. The ride upward was quiet. The road curved steeply through dense forest. Moonlight filtered through tall trees. The wheels rolled steadily over gravel. Myra kept her hands folded tightly in her lap. Questions filled her mind. What would her work involve? How strict would he be? Why had he offered so much money? Elias sat across from her, staring out the window at the dark mountains. His expression revealed nothing. After nearly an hour, the trees opened, revealing a large timber house built near the edge of the mountain ridge. Warm lights glowed from its windows. The structure looked strong and beautiful, built from thick logs and stone. The carriage stopped. A servant opened the door, bowing slightly to Elias. The man looked surprised to see Mara, but asked no questions. Inside, the house was spacious yet simple. Wooden beams stretched across the ceiling. A stone fireplace burned brightly. The scent of pine and smoke filled the air. Mara expected immediate instructions. Instead, Elias removed his coat and handed it to the servant. "Prepare the east guest room," he said calmly. The servant nodded and disappeared upstairs. "Guest room?" Mara blinked in confusion. Elias turned to her. "You must be tired," he said. "You'll rest tonight, we'll speak tomorrow." That was all, no list of duties, no strict warnings, no cold orders. He gestured toward a chair near the fire. She sat slowly, unsure what to say. For a long moment, neither spoke. The fire crackled softly between them. Finally, Elias looked at her again, his gaze thoughtful but unreadable. "You stood with courage tonight," he said quietly. She did not know how to respond. After a few seconds, he added, "You won't regret coming here." Before she could ask what he meant, the servant returned and informed her the room was ready. Mara followed him upstairs, her footsteps echoing lightly against wooden floors. The guest room was warm and comfortable, far beyond what she expected. A clean bed, a small writing desk, a window overlooking the dark valley below. She stood by the window and looked out at the distant lights of Silver Ridge far beneath the mountain. Her debt was gone. Her future, however, remained uncertain. Downstairs, Elias remained by the fire long after she had gone to bed. His face, illuminated by orange flames, showed something few had ever seen before. Not coldness, not pride, but quiet reflection. The mountain wind howled softly outside the large house, carrying with it the weight of the night's decision. In the small town below, people were still talking about the auction. But up on the mountain ridge, something far more important than a transaction had begun. Neither of them fully understood it yet, but the choice Elias made that night and the path Mara stepped onto would soon change more than just one life. It would change the entire town. The first morning on the mountain arrived quietly. Soft sunlight slipped through the tall windows of the guest room and rested gently on the wooden floor. Mara woke slowly, confused for a moment about where she was. Then the memory of the auction returned and her heart tightened. She sat up in the large bed and listened. No loud voices, no harsh footsteps, only the distant sound of wind moving through pine trees and the faint crackling of a fire downstairs. She had prepared herself for strict rules and immediate instructions. She expected someone to knock on the door at sunrise and hand her a long list of duties. Instead, there was silence. After washing and dressing in her simple blue dress, she walked carefully down the wooden staircase. The house felt different in daylight. Large windows allowed sunlight to pour into the wide living room. The furniture was sturdy but not overly decorated. Everything looked strong, practical, and clean. Elias Rowan stood near the large dining table. He was already dressed, reading a stack of papers. He looked up as she entered. "Good morning," he said calmly. She hesitated slightly before replying, "Good morning." On the table sat a simple breakfast, bread, fruit, and warm tea. 2 plates were placed neatly opposite each other. "Sit," he said. She obeyed, unsure what tone to expect. They ate in quiet for a few minutes. The silence was not uncomfortable, but it carried unspoken questions. Finally, Elias folded the paper he had been reading and reached beside him. He placed a thick envelope on the table between them. Mara recognized it immediately. It was the same envelope she had seen the night before when the debt collectors confirmed payment. "This is for you," he said. Her fingers did not move. "I don't understand," she replied carefully. He pushed the envelope closer. "It contains the full amount I paid last night," her breath caught. "But you already settled the debt." "Yes." "Then why give it to me?" Elias leaned back slightly in his chair. His expression remained steady, but there was something deeper in his eyes now, not coldness. "Something heavier. You signed a contract because you had no choice," he said. "I do not believe in taking advantage of desperation." She stared at him, trying to understand. "You can take this money," he continued. "Go back into town, repay the debt properly in your own name, and leave Silver Ridge. You will owe nothing to anyone, not to the lenders, not to me." The room felt suddenly still. "Or," he added, "you may stay here, not as a servant. Not as property, you will be free. You may work if you wish, leave if you wish. The choice will be yours." Mara's mind struggled to process his words. She had prepared herself for survival, for endurance, not for freedom. "Why would you do this?" she asked quietly. Elias did not answer immediately. He stood and walked toward the large window that overlooked the valley below. The town appeared small from this height. "Years ago," he began slowly, "my family faced debt as well. My father made mistakes in business. When he died, creditors showed no patience. My younger sister was young and proud. She refused charity. She signed contracts that forced her into hard labor far from home." Mara listened closely. "No one stepped forward to give her a choice," he continued. "I was still building my fortune then. I did not have the power I have now. By the time I could help, she had already left. She never returned." His voice did not shake, but there was quiet regret in it. "I will not watch another person lose their future because of numbers written on paper." The wind brushed softly against the windows. Mara looked down at the envelope again. It felt heavier now. "You expect nothing in return?" she asked carefully. "Respect," he replied simply. "And honesty?" She let out a slow breath. Part of her wanted to accept immediately and leave, to begin again in another town where no one would remember the auction, to escape the whispers. But another part of her felt something unfamiliar, curiosity. "You are offering me complete freedom," she said. "Yes. And if I stay, then you stay because you choose to, not because you must." The simplicity of his answer unsettled her more than any command would have. After breakfast, Elias excused himself to review estate matters. He told her she was welcome to explore the house and grounds. Mara carried the envelope upstairs to the guest room. She sat at the small writing desk and opened it carefully. Inside were neatly arranged bills, more money than she had ever held in her life. With this, she could travel to the city, rent a small home, start a sewing business, study further. The possibilities felt endless, yet something stopped her. She walked to the window again and looked down at Silver Ridge. She had grown up there. Every path, every tree, every face was familiar. Leaving would mean cutting herself off from everything she knew. And then there was Elias. His offer had not been made with pride. It had been made with understanding. Later that afternoon, she decided to explore the estate grounds. The property stretched far beyond what she had imagined. There were stables, storage barns, and fields carefully maintained by hired workers. She noticed something surprising. The workers moved calmly, not fearfully. They greeted Elias with respect, not anxiety. One older worker tipped his hat at her. "You must be the new guest," he said kindly. Guest, not worker. She thanked him politely and continued walking. Near the edge of the property, she found a small wooden building that looked like an office. Through the window, she saw shelves filled with ledgers and documents. Curiosity guided her inside. Stacks of paperwork lay organized neatly. She recognized account books, contracts, and letters. She had always been good with numbers. Her father had taught her carefully. Without thinking too much, she began reading through one ledger. She quickly noticed small calculation errors. Nothing major, but enough to cause confusion later. "Those books can be difficult," a voice said from the doorway. She turned quickly. Elias stood there watching quietly. "I wasn't snooping," she said quickly. "I know," he replied. "You were correcting." She felt heat rise to her cheeks. "You understand accounting?" he asked. "My father taught me," she answered, "before his business failed." Elias stepped inside. "Show me what you found." She pointed to the columns and explained the miscalculations clearly. He listened carefully, asking thoughtful questions. For the first time since arriving, she felt steady again, capable, useful. "You have skill," he said. She shrugged lightly. "It's just numbers." "Numbers build or destroy lives," he replied quietly. The afternoon passed as they reviewed documents together. There was no pressure in the room, only focus. For a moment, she forgot about the envelope waiting upstairs. As evening approached, she returned to the house feeling mentally tired but strangely calm. That night she sat alone in the guest room once more, holding the envelope again. Freedom was still in her hands, but now the decision felt different. If she left tomorrow, she would leave with money and independence. No shame would follow her. If she stayed, she would stay by choice, and perhaps help shape something greater than her own survival. She thought about Elia's sister, about lost chances, about how easily people could fall when no one offered a hand. For the first time since her father's passing, she did not feel like a victim of circumstance. She felt powerful, because the decision belonged to her. The next morning arrived cold and bright. Elias stood near the fireplace as she walked downstairs. He looked as if he had not slept much. Perhaps he expected her to leave at sunrise. She walked directly toward him. The envelope was not in her hands. "I've decided," she said calmly. He waited. "I will stay." He studied her face carefully. "You understand that you are free to leave at any time." "I understand," she replied. "I am staying because I choose to, not because I owe you." A quiet pause filled the room. Then, for the first time, the smallest hint of a smile touched his expression. "Good," he said. And just like that, something invisible shifted between them. No contract bound her now. No debt defined her. Only choice. Outside, the mountain wind moved through the trees, carrying the scent of pine across the ridge. Down in Silver Ridge, townspeople continued to whisper about the mysterious auction. They believed Elias Rowan had purchased control. They did not know the truth. He had given it away. And Mara, standing freely in the great wooden house on the mountain, had just made the first real decision of her new life. The morning after Mara decided to stay, life on the mountain began in a way she had never imagined. She expected strict schedules, endless chores, and a life filled with orders. But Elias Rowan did not behave like she thought a rich man would. There were no rules written in stone, no lists of duties, no watchful eyes scrutinizing her every move. She woke to sunlight spilling into the guest room, soft and warm, and for a moment she just breathed. She could hear the distant sound of the river flowing past the estate and the faint clatter of pots in the kitchen. Outside, birds called to one another, their songs echoing across the pine-covered mountains. Myra dressed quickly, brushing her hair and tying it neatly back, then took a moment to stand by the window, looking out across the valley. The town of Silver Ridge lay below like a painting, tiny houses clustered together, smoke rising gently from chimneys. She had grown up among those houses, known every path and corner, yet now it all seemed far away. Downstairs, Elias was already in the kitchen. He moved quietly, preparing breakfast himself. It was simple: bread, eggs, and fresh fruit. Mara realized that despite his wealth, he valued practicality over luxury. He had no showy decorations or gilded furniture, only what was needed to live comfortably. "Good morning," he said without looking up. His voice was calm as always. "Good morning," Myra replied a little hesitantly. He gestured toward a chair. "Sit, breakfast is ready." They ate in quiet for a while. The silence was comfortable, not tense. Mara found herself listening to the faint sound of the wind through the trees and the crackle of the fire. Finally, she spoke. I don't know where to begin," she admitted. Begin anywhere you like, Elias said, taking a sip of his tea. Myra considered the envelope he had given her. The money inside could have set her up in another town, far away from her past, from the whispers of the auction, from the memory of her father's debts. But something held her here. Perhaps it was the mountains, perhaps the quiet strength of the man who had offered her choice rather than control. I want to help, she said finally, not because I have to, but because I think I can. Elias looked at her steadily. Very well, there is much to do. The estate was larger than she had imagined. There were barns, stables, and fields that stretched across the mountain slope. Workers moved through the property with quiet efficiency, tending animals, repairing fences, and organizing supplies. Yet no one seemed afraid or rushed. Mara noticed that the people working here did so with respect, not fear. They treated Elias as someone to be admired, not someone to obey blindly. Elias led her to one of the office buildings on the property. Inside, shelves of ledgers, contracts, and correspondence lined the walls. Papers were stacked neatly on desks, waiting to be reviewed. Mara's eyes widened. She had always been good with numbers. Her father had taught her carefully, and despite their misfortune, she had a sharp mind for accounts. You understand these ledgers? Elias asked quietly. Yes, she said. My father taught me he was careful with money. Too careful, some would say. She allowed herself a small smile. He nodded. Good, we need order here. Mistakes can hurt more than you think. For hours they worked together. Mara corrected small errors, organized accounts, and suggested ways to streamline operations. Elias listened to her carefully, asking questions and respecting her opinions. It was unlike any work she had done before. She was not a servant. She was a partner in thought, even if only quietly for now. By mid-afternoon, Mara felt exhausted but satisfied. For the first time in months, she felt useful, capable, and appreciated. She realized that her decision to stay had not been about convenience or fear, it had been about opportunity. The choice she had made empowered her in ways she had not yet fully understood. That evening she walked through the estate grounds. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of pine and fresh earth. She found the stables and watched the horses moving quietly in their pens. The workers waved at her politely. She waved back, feeling the odd comfort of recognition without hierarchy. She had chosen to be here, and in return, the mountains seemed to accept her. Elias joined her silently, leaning on the wooden railing overlooking the valley. He did not speak immediately. The silence stretched between them, but it was not uncomfortable. Mara realized that in a life filled with judgment and expectation, this quiet was a gift. You are adjusting well, he said finally. I think I am, she replied honestly. It's different than I imagined. Good different or bad different? Good different, she said quickly. I feel like I can breathe here, like I can think. He nodded, studying her face. That is the first step to doing meaningful work. You must breathe or everything else will be in vain. Over the next weeks, Mara settled into a rhythm. She helped Elias with accounts, assisted in organizing deliveries of supplies to struggling families, and even began drafting plans for a small school in Silver Ridge for children whose families could not afford education. Elias encouraged her ideas, offering guidance without forcing her decisions. Mara began to realize that the estate was not just a home, it was a center of opportunity, and she was allowed to shape it. As she spent more time with Elias, Mara began to see a different side of the man everyone in town whispered about. He was not cold or heartless. He was cautious, private, and thoughtful. He spoke little of himself, but when he did, he revealed a mind concerned with fairness, responsibility, and legacy. Mara found herself respecting him not for his wealth, but for his principles. One afternoon, while reviewing correspondence, Mara found letters from farmers requesting help. Some had lost livestock to disease, some had homes damaged in storms. Others were families struggling with debt. She brought the letters to Elias, suggesting solutions she had calculated carefully. He listened, occasionally asking questions, and then made decisions. Mara realized that he trusted her judgment, that her voice mattered. She was no longer the girl who had been auctioned. She was a contributor, a voice that could influence change. Word of their work slowly spread to Silver Ridge. Townspeople began to notice deliveries of food, repairs being made, and small jobs created on the estate. Whispers about Elias' mysterious generosity circulated quietly. Mara found herself walking through town, greeted politely by families who had once ignored her struggles. No one mentioned the auction. It was as if the past had been replaced with something new, something hopeful. One evening, as Mara prepared dinner in the estate kitchen, Elias approached her with a quiet question. "Do you ever regret staying?" he asked, leaning against the doorway. Mara looked up from the vegetables she was chopping. "Never," she said without hesitation. "I could have left, taken the money, and started over elsewhere, but I don't want to leave, not yet. There is work to be done here, and I want to see it through." He nodded slowly, as if he had expected this answer. "I am glad. Freedom is meaningless if it is not chosen. You chose this life. That is what matters." Days turned into weeks and weeks into months. Mara and Elias worked closely together. They debated ideas, disagreed sometimes, and challenged one another thoughtfully. Respect grew between them. Elias admired Mara's courage, intelligence, and determination. Mara respected his careful planning, his generosity, and his unwavering principles. The estate became a place of purpose rather than isolation. Children from the town began attending lessons Mara organized in a small room of the house. Families received support in quiet ways. Tasks that had seemed impossible began to succeed. Mara discovered the joy of contributing to lives beyond her own. Despite all of this, Mara never forgot the envelope of money. It sat in her room untouched. It was a reminder not of debt, but of choice. She realized that real freedom was not in the amount of money one had. It was in the ability to decide, to act, and to influence one's life and the lives of others. One night after the children's lessons had ended, Mara and Elias sat by the fireplace in the great room. The fire crackled, sending flickering shadows across the walls. The estate was quiet, even the workers had gone to bed. "You have changed this place," Elias said quietly. Mara smiled softly. "We have changed it together," he nodded. "Yes, but you brought something more. You reminded me that freedom is more than wealth. It is responsibility, compassion, and courage." Mara felt warmth spread through her chest. "I didn't do it for praise," she said. "I did it because it felt right." "Exactly," he said, his gaze steady. "And that is why you are here. Not because you were auctioned, not because of debt, but because you are capable, and you chose to be here." She leaned back, listening to the quiet night. The wind moved softly through the pines, carrying the scent of the forest into the warm room. She felt at peace. For the first time since her father's death, Mara understood something deeply. Life could be harsh and unfair, but freedom, real freedom, was about more than escape. It was about choice, courage, and using one's voice to make a difference. Elias watched her quietly, understanding that her presence was changing not only the estate, but himself. He had learned slowly that true wealth was not money, land, or power. It was generosity, trust, and the chance to allow someone to grow and decide for themselves. As the fire burned low and the stars began to shine through the high windows, Mara realized that staying had been the bravest choice of all. Not because she owed anything, but because she believed in herself, in what she could do, and in what could be built when people acted with respect and care. And so, life continued on the mountain, steady and purposeful. Mara worked, learned, and taught. Elias planned, listened, and guided. The estate transformed from a private stronghold into a quiet center of hope for the town below. Mara was no longer a girl defined by debt. She was a young woman empowered by choice, courage, and the chance to help others. And Elias Rowan, the once distant mountain man, was beginning to understand that true change could come not from wealth alone, but from trust, compassion, and giving others the freedom to choose. The snow had not yet fallen, but life was already changing. The mountain seemed quieter now, but full of possibility. Mara understood that the path ahead would not always be easy, but it would be hers. And for the first time in years, she felt truly free, not because someone gave her money, but because she had chosen to stay. Winter approached slowly in Silver Ridge. The first snowflakes fell lightly on the mountain, dusting the tall pines and rooftops with white. The valley below shimmered in the cold sunlight, and smoke rose gently from chimneys as families prepared for the coming months. In the mountain estate, life continued steadily, but now there was a new energy that filled the halls and grounds. Mara had settled fully into her role. She moved with confidence, walking through rooms and gardens, speaking with workers, reviewing accounts, and guiding the children who came for lessons. The children had come cautiously at first, hesitant to trust the stranger who lived in the tall house above the town. But Mara's warmth, patience, and genuine kindness won them over. She taught them to read and write, to solve problems, and to take pride in small accomplishments. Some of the older children helped her with basic math and accounts. Slowly, families began to trust her and visit more frequently, asking for advice, help with letters, or guidance for small projects. The estate was no longer a distant, mysterious place. It had become a hub of hope. Elias watched these changes quietly from his study, often smiling to himself. He had expected Mara to stay because of her sense of duty, or perhaps because the estate offered comfort and safety. But what he saw now was far more powerful. She had chosen to stay freely. Every day, her choices made the estate more alive, more meaningful. One crisp morning, Mara and Elias stood on the balcony overlooking the valley. The air was sharp and cold, but the sun shone brightly, reflecting off patches of snow. She held a stack of letters in her hands, requests from families across Silver Ridge. "I've been thinking," she said softly, "that the work we're doing here could reach more people, not just families near the estate, but everyone in town who needs help." Elias nodded. "Go on." "We could start a fund," Mara continued, "to help families with debts, small repairs, and schooling. We could provide support quietly without making anyone feel ashamed. You have the resources, I have the knowledge. Together we could change lives." He studied her carefully. "You have thought this through, you understand the responsibility involved." "I do," she said. "I don't want to give away more than we can manage, but I want to make sure no one has to suffer because of circumstances they cannot control." Elias' eyes softened. He had spent years using his wealth quietly, supporting families, funding scholarships, and repairing homes, but he had never allowed anyone else to lead or speak for the people. He realized Mara had not only the courage, but the empathy to guide this effort responsibly. "Very well," he said finally. "We will begin the Silver Ridge Freedom Fund. You will lead it." Mara's heart swelled. She felt a mixture of pride and purpose. For the first time, her life was about more than survival. It was about creating opportunity and protecting freedom for others. The announcement was made quietly at first. Families received letters or visits offering help. No public attention was drawn. Slowly, word spread about the mysterious generosity of the mountain estate. People began to speak differently of Elias Rowan, once whispered about as a distant, harsh man. Now he was seen as a figure of quiet hope. Mara's influence grew steadily. She visited families personally, listened to their concerns, and guided the allocation of funds and resources. She saw the relief in their eyes, the quiet gratitude that came not from obligation, but from trust. As winter deepened, the children's lessons expanded. Mara introduced creative projects, painting, storytelling, and music. The children laughed and played, sharing what they learned with families in the village. The estate, once silent and imposing, now rang with joy, curiosity, and life. One evening, Mara and Elias sat together in the study. The fire burned brightly, and the room was warm with the scent of wood smoke. Mara had just returned from visiting a family whose house had been damaged in a storm. Repairs were underway, and the parents expressed their quiet thanks, insisting they could repay the kindness someday. Mara shook her head. "There is no repayment needed," she said. "Helping them is the point. They are free to live without fear. That is all that matters." Elias nodded, his gaze thoughtful. "You have brought more than help, Mara. You have brought purpose. The estate is alive because of you." Mara smiled. "I only follow your example." "No," he said firmly. "You have created something I could not have done alone. You remind me that freedom is not just about giving money or resources. It is about giving choice and dignity." For the first time, Mara saw Elias truly open. She realized that his distance, his silence, and his caution had always been his way of protecting himself. But with her, he allowed vulnerability. And in that vulnerability, a partnership grew, not just in work, but in trust. Months passed and spring approached. Snow melted from the mountains, rivers flowed freely, and the estate's gardens began to bloom. The Freedom Fund expanded, helping more families than anyone had anticipated. The town began to look up at the mountain with a sense of respect rather than fear. One day, Mara suggested holding a small gathering in town. Not an auction, not a show of wealth, but a meeting where families could come together to discuss needs, share stories, and see how the estate could continue to help. Elias agreed, though quietly, leaving Mara to take the lead. The hall in Silver Ridge was full. Families from all over the valley attended. Mara stood at the front, her heart steady but her hands slightly trembling. She began speaking. "No one should have to sell their future to survive," she said, her voice clear and calm. Starting today, the Silver Ridge Freedom Fund will help families facing debt, housing repairs, and education. No one will stand alone again. No one will be forced to give up their freedom because of circumstances beyond their control. The room fell silent for a moment. Then applause began, soft at first, then growing louder. Faces lit up with hope. People who had once whispered about the auction now looked at Mara and Elias with admiration. Elias stood beside her, watching quietly. He did not speak. He did not need to. His presence alone, steady and supportive, was enough. From that day forward, the estate became a place not of mystery, but of opportunity. Children came daily for lessons. Families received aid. Farmers gained resources to repair land and livestock. And Mara, once a girl forced into a contract by debt, became a young woman who shaped the lives of many with intelligence, compassion, and courage. The envelope of money she had once held remained untouched in her room. She framed it on the wall instead as a reminder of choice and freedom. Money had been offered to her, it had been tempting, but the true gift had been the chance to decide for herself, and that choice had changed everything. Elias, too, changed. The mountain no longer seemed like a fortress or a place of isolation. It was alive with purpose, laughter, and hope. He learned that generosity was not only about giving resources, it was about trusting others, letting them make choices, and allowing them to lead. By summer, the town had changed in small but meaningful ways. The school and the estate continued to grow, funded quietly by Elias and guided passionately by Mara. Families were stronger, children were learning, and the mountain estate had become a symbol of hope rather than fear. Mara and Elias continued to work together. Their partnership deepened, not in words of romance at first, but in mutual respect and understanding. They debated decisions, planned projects, and celebrated successes. Every small change in the town or the lives of the families was a shared victory. One evening, after a long day of visiting families and organizing school lessons, Mara and Elias sat on the balcony overlooking the valley. The sun was setting, painting the mountains in shades of gold and pink. Mara felt a sense of peace she had never known. "Do you ever wonder," she asked softly, "what my life would have been like if I had left?" Elias looked at her quietly. "I think about it sometimes. But I do not regret your choice. You stayed because you believed in something greater. That is more important than any alternate path." Mara smiled, feeling warmth spread through her chest. "I think I am learning what true freedom means. Not just money or safety, but choice, responsibility, and helping others have a chance." Elias nodded. "Yes, and in giving that freedom to others, you have strengthened yourself as well. You have grown far beyond what anyone could have expected." As stars began to fill the night sky, Mara realized that the auction, the debt, and the mountain estate were all part of a path that led her here. Not to servitude, not to fear, but to purpose. In the quiet of the night, with the wind moving softly through the pines, Mara understood something important. Life was not about what was taken from you. It was about what you choose to do with the opportunities you are given. Elias, standing silently beside her, had offered that opportunity, but Mara had embraced it. She had chosen to stay, to grow, and to shape a better future, not just for herself, but for everyone around her. And that choice, simple yet powerful, had changed the lives of many. Silver Ridge had seen the auction as a moment of desperation. Mara and Elias had turned it into a beginning of hope, dignity, and freedom. The mountain no longer loomed as a symbol of wealth or isolation. It shone as a beacon of possibility. And Mara, once caught in circumstances beyond her control, now stood tall, free, respected, and empowered. Life on the estate was no longer about contracts, debts, or fear. It was about growth, compassion, and the quiet power of choice. And in that choice, Mara found her true freedom,